everyone, welcome to the India Climate Dialogues hosted by the City Climate Alliance at the National Institute of Urban Affairs. The India Climate Dialogue is an ongoing series of dialogues with our Alliance network partners, where together we attempt to create meaningful and actionable conversations. The topic that we're discussing today is capacity building for cities, from training to action. To give you all a background, the Paris Agreement acknowledged capacity building as a fundamental precondition to foster sustained coordination and enhanced coherence to enable climate mitigation and adaptation. But the area of capacity building still remains ambiguous. What kinds of capacities are required to enable climate and sustainable urban development transformation, and how to build effective capacities that translate into actions need more clarity. This becomes all the more accentuated when cities are challenged with addressing the pressing development needs. Increasingly, cities are at the crossroads of addressing the complexities of mitigating greenhouse gas emissions, adapting to climate change, and addressing the challenges of urbanization all at the same time. So the big question, therefore, is how can capacity building enable the mainstreaming of climate action into the ongoing urban development, and where are the opportunities to enhance this? To discuss the topic, we have a panel of very interesting experts from the administration, implementation, and the academia background. Let me first introduce you Ms. V. Manjula, who's the Additional Chief Secretary, Government of Karnataka. She's also the Director General for the Administrative Training Institute, Mysore, and Commissioner for the Directorate of Urban Land Transport in Bangalore. Next, we have Mr. Sebastian Markat, who's the Advisor at GIZ India, and Ms. Namrata Damankar, who's the Associate Professor with the Development of Environment Architecture and Planning at BNCA Pune. I'm your moderator, Vaishnavi Shankar. I lead the training and capacity building vertical for the Climate Center for Cities at the National Institute of Urban Affairs. A very warm welcome to the speakers and for all those who've tuned in today. Let us begin the dialogue by understanding the capacity gaps in cities for applying a climate lens to reduce the climate risk and enhance resilience. And to address this, I would like to pose my first question to Ms. Manjula. Ma'am, since cities are at the forefront of dealing with the dual risk of urbanization and climate change, what are the key capacities that is experienced in the cities?
Thank you, Vaishnavi. The first point I want to make is that cities are not homogeneous. There are metropolitan cities, there are small cities, there are medium-sized cities. The size and complexity of issues that they face is different. But there are certain common issues that plague all the cities. First and foremost is in all Indian cities, most of the Indian cities are not planned cities. So they grow organically. You always find a gap in infrastructure and services. At least the peripheral areas are mostly underserved, while central areas are better and so on. So to begin with, cities are grappling with ensuring proper infrastructure and proper services, because we need to understand the present level of challenges to also appreciate what are the additional challenges that they would face in the coming days. Now, to add to it, the resource base of most Indian urban local bodies is very thin. Now, their tax base is poor, the tax structure may be poor, or they don't collect the taxes on a regular basis. So they're totally dependent on governments for budgetary grants for developing infrastructure or developing services and so on. So this also leads to some sort of a vicious circle. As such, they're unable to employ, engage qualified manpower. So many urban local bodies are understaffed. They don't have qualified manpower, and the manpower that is there is traditionally trained to discharge normal functions of urban local bodies, like solid waste management and so on, so on and so forth, and not really trained to plan and implement initiatives keeping in mind the climate mitigation and adaptation that is needed. To just give you a few of the issues, a few of the gaps that I see. Number one, of course, is the fact that skills are lacking. They may have knowledge and awareness of climate change and the impacts, but the necessary skill that is needed to kind of plan some kind of measures for mitigation or adaptation, they are lacking. The other point is that they don't even have access to technical expertise. Now, in metropolitan cities, at least you have access to technical expertise. There are consultants and so on. But in small cities, they don't even have access to such kind of a technical expertise. That's one. The second issue is that probably there is no clarity of what they need to do in terms of, let's say, standard operational protocols and frameworks. And when they are not there, it is also difficult for them to act. That is the second capacity gap. Third is about data. I think most Indian cities are poor in, capturing data or kind of monitor, analyzing that. So the data is also not easily forthcoming. There are no data measurement, things that are there. See, we don't even know how much emissions are kind of created in a particular city. Then what are you planning for? You're generally planning for climate change mitigation, but you really don't have a particular or specific target. So the lack of data is also one of the issues that plague cities. Fourthly, I feel, and during COVID, we have noticed that, see, all skills need not be necessarily in government, and government agencies also need to be able to build partnerships and leverage skills that are available outside the government ecosystem. But many times that capacity to kind of identify the skills that are outside and be able to engage them or kind of leverage them is also lacking. So these are some of the capacity gaps that we see in the urban local bodies or Indian cities. Yeah.
So these are very valid points. First thing to understand is that the cities are not homogeneous and they're of different sizes, and that of course they are also growing in an organic fashion. So the key challenge is for them to look at basic services and infrastructure, and focusing on that is what most of the engineers in the cities are trained for, keeping in mind that there's a lack of resources firstly in the cities, but whoever are available are trained to look at these basic services. So looking at skilling, looking at lack of clarity, although they understand what climate change is, but the technical knowledge and access to that is what is missing. But this brings me to the next point where, there are numerous training programs for officials across all levels, both by the national and state governments. But how can we leverage these programs to equip cities in making informed decision-making, looking at the data-informed decision-making as well, as Manjula ma'am indicated? As in, one is understanding the GHG emissions, looking at the socio-economic and spatial vulnerabilities and climate risks be considered in all the projects, right? So at this point, I'd like to bring in Namrata here, as she has worked very closely with the state and the national level capacity building programs. So Namrata, there are many programs for addressing knowledge gaps, right? And they handle cities to promote continuous learning and training that is cross-sectoral in nature and also holistic, specifically when we have to address climate change.
Thank you for inviting me to be on this panel discussion. I thank NIUA and the Climate Cities Alliance for this. Yes, I mean, like I said, just to talk about the kind of trainings that we have done under the capacity building for government officials, the sort of success stories that we have had over the last 1.5 years is that we have managed to sort of train more than 120 town planners from the state of Maharashtra. But while training them or providing the capacity building with respect to climate change and all the modules that we looked at, one of the biggest gap I think we faced, or one of the biggest challenges we faced, was actually firstly identifying who really needs that training, because it was at large sort of floated as an open sort of modules to choose from. That sort of created a problem, saying that do we really need it? Secondly, I think the kind of town planners or the kind of departments that we sort of build capacities for were much smaller towns. So they came right from just for example Satara in Maharashtra. There was Alibag, so really very small upcoming towns. But the good point was that they actually are looking forward to taking up this training to actually make changes in their development plans or their regional plans, which are getting sort of formulated right now. But the problem on the other side is, the flip side is that, like I said, since they are unaware of even the basic things, this sort of training sort of when put to them, came as a sort of too sort of, what do we say, it was very intimidating. It's sort of more like a burden, saying that, okay, now this, we have to sort of put in even this layer of climate change, when actually they're dealing with much different issues right now in terms of water scarcity. They're looking at, other challenges. So that was, I think, one of the biggest gaps that I think we needed to, sort of first identify sort of who requires what kind of training programs. With respect to that, taking that forward, how do we actually look at continuous training? So once now we have trained this batch of, stakeholders, the problem is that there is no mechanism to actually look at this continuous development, right, of these stakeholders or these administrative bodies. So I think if we have this mechanism in place, and that too, instead of looking at, I feel that administrative bodies should look inside out. So the need for these trainings should ideally come from within the administration itself, rather than coming from outside in. I think that is what happened at this point of time, that there was NIUA, or there was some outside program, like you said, who sort of, facilitated the need for these trainings to be implemented. But rather than that, it should happen the reverse way, where the administrative itself demands for the kind of trainings that they require. So this inside out approach, I think, would really sort of help in streamlining this. And last point that I would want to make with in terms of these programs, like you said, that are coming forward, the only problem with these programs that come, I feel they are very short term. In terms of their duration. So actually have a continuous mechanism like your in terms of training, I think these programs need to be of longer duration. And again, there has to be a continuous engagement with the administrative body, to actually leverage, to actually convert these climate, sort of capacity building to actually on ground action. Yeah, so those are my points.
All right. Thanks, Namrata. I think bringing in another mechanism for ensuring that there's continuity, and the role of academia, of how they can play a major role in ensuring that continuity in training, is also something that you'd point out, I think, which is a very useful thing, because we need many stakeholders to come together to look at capacity building. It can't just be one entity providing the training per se. And I think the other point on overwhelming, right, because you specifically mentioned about smaller cities, and that it feels very challenging for them and overwhelming to look at many aspects that is beyond what they've been doing on a regular basis per se. So I think this is a very good point for me to bring in Sebastian here, because once the delivery hurdle is crossed, translating the learning into action is what becomes crucial. And I know GIZ India very recently has worked closely with 3 cities through the Climate Smart Cities project to bridge this particular gap, right? So Sebastian, a wide range of, top-down and bottom-up processes can deepen this climate knowledge that is required in cities. So to begin with, what are the challenges in translating the capacity building training into action that you've seen in these cities?
Oh, also from me, thanks a lot for organizing this very interesting roundtable discussion, and also having invited me. So thanks a lot for that. Actually, there are several different issues. What is challenging, why perhaps the action is not as intense or as visible as we would hope for during or after the capacity building or during the trainings. So firstly, I think there are lots of other priorities. We have heard it already also with Ms. Manchula, and Namrata told it before. Lots of different important pressing issues the cities are having when it comes especially to the service delivery, where climate probably hasn't been that topic, that priority, in the forefront for the last years and decades. Yeah? And now we realized that also in the Indian agenda, it is coming more and more. It is more and more important. It is more and more really in the forefront. Yeah. But when it comes to quick actions which sometimes required, I definitely think that there are sometimes also immediate, more pressing issues where the resources are going to, and of course also more direct visible impacts. Yeah. So this is why probably the whole climate topic is not dealt with as intensely. Officers might be then busy with other things, and probably also not directly sensitized. So and it's also not really institutionalized, so might be having trainings, but there's no proper review, monitoring mechanism, recap of the trainings, not too much follow-up, no refreshing courses many times offered. Yeah. The right audience, also this was said before, the right audience, we need to do the right trainings for the right people. This is also always very important. And we need to see that we get the ownership of that climate topic of everyone in the city administration, but at the society at all, to also hold probably the city administrations and everyone accountable. I think what then makes the thing probably a little bit more challenging is also the difficult jargon that we are having. So the little bit technical climate speech, which probably might not always reach the people on the ground, because if it's not really demand driven, then it's always quite tricky to come into action and to implement things. So when I think at our Climate Smart Cities project, what was a little bit a good idea at the start, which we also did with all of our 3 cities we were working in, Kochi, Bhubaneswar and Coimbatore, is heat island mapping. So this is quite quickly to make with GIS. We also made a manual on that, which I think also got circulated quite well and should be also spread more. And then you have this private sector also needs to get more involved, also more sensitized, and in somehow possible also perhaps involved into some capacity building activities. And then also the climate funding agencies who would be apt for the respective cities to identify them, this buzzword, to develop bankable proposals, bankable projects by the cities, but then also to develop the skills for that, which probably also goes beyond climate action skills. Yeah. So we have challenges here in many fields. What we could recently finalized and which we can then also disseminate soon and which might put everything a little bit nicely together is the institutionalization study, which we did also with the Climate Smart Cities project, a bifolded one for Germany and one for India, where really see how the current institutionalization of climate action, the whole framework looks like in the field of policies, in the field of institutionalization, in exchange, and also on capacity building on the various level. The current status in both countries, plus recommendation, what we can learn from each other, and actually also what could be improved, on which fields we could tackle to improve the things. So I think this is also has been a very useful exercise, which we are happy to share. Now I think I'll talk a little bit about translating capacity building into action. The training programs actually should be, or the trainings actually also a little bit more programmatic. Like also we started with a climate smart cities assessment framework. So no once-off activities, which might get forgotten later, but really some serious, some longer thing, which gets really regularly reviewed and checked. And I think with the climate smart cities assessment framework and the whole trainings and capacity building with the city around that, and then really also seeing the ranking, how they might improve in some particular sectors. This has been a very, very good joint exercise of all of us to see how it could be done, or what is a good success story. Trainings, capacity building should be always, I think, exciting, sensitizing also, not to really also tell not only the technical details, but also what actually is the reason why are we doing that? No? Why is it so important to work on that, to really intrinsically motivate the people and work on that? And then also peer-to-peer learning, I think is also very essential to see what others are doing And I think also here C-Cube with a national urban learning platform with different also modes of trainings. They are also stored, is here also in the forefront, and the things is also, I think, already going quite well in the right direction. What should be also there definitely is also field visits, exposure visits. Internationally, yes, definitely also to see a little bit what other countries are doing, what could be then adapted to the Indian context, but definitely also, I would say, within India, sometimes even within the States, there's so much to learn within India, and there's so many cities who have already done really great things, also in the climate field, to learn from. So this is something definitely which which is also very important, which are both things within India as well as internationally. Also, we're jointly NIUA and GIZ also continuing now with the Urban Act project, and also then importance of the regional training institutes that definitely have a very important role also when it comes to localizing the trainings, to support them. Also what we did with the Climate Smart Cities project, to set up training of the trainers, that they really then have the responsibility and the knowledge and the capacities, and to go to leadership to train really all the cities in the respective state or area of responsibility to bring the climate topic forward. And perhaps also the training institute can learn even of each other. And yeah, to make awareness sessions, particularly on climate, that could be anchored at the cities regularly. Also, for example, like climate trainings that could be even made mandatory when it comes to the promotion, or it comes for the senior officials or something like that, to really institutionalize also trainings with the climate issues. Yeah.
Sebastian, some very interesting points. One, I think like Namrata also said, you're saying that the training has to be demand driven from the cities, and that this entire thing needs to be institutionalized, and linking the training to the performance of the cities is one of the ways to bridge that gap of institutionalizing, with the example that you just took. And that there is a need to bring in other stakeholders, like I think Namrata mentioned about academia, but you're talking about the private sector and the other stakeholders who also need to like work together in building this capacity, was the point. So what I gather is that the key challenges with respect to the learning motivation and the institutional outreach, and also the barriers with respect to technology and innovation kind of like persist, and even the data point that all of you have made. So let me come back to Manjula ma'am here to understand like what are the training needs and climate aspirations that is emerging in our cities, and how can we address these gaps? And also some of the points that Sebastian made, ma'am, if you would like to reflect on that, I think that will also be very, very useful of how we can institutionalize this training to action.
Thank you. The first comment I have is that, yes, it is good if training is demand driven, but many times the organizations may not perceive the need. So I don't see anything wrong in a training program being tailored from above, maybe from the national level or the state level, and is delivered with a particular goal or objective in mind. There are any number of such training programs we do, and that helps. For example, disaster management, though it is linked to climate change, over a period of time there has been strong institutionalizing. You have the national disaster management plan, you have state disaster management plan, city disaster management plan, and you have a whole lot of trainings, standards, protocols, and things like that, checklists, etc. So I feel sometimes somebody somewhere has to take the initiative and do the training. So that's one. The second point I wanted to mention is that, again, training also cannot be uniform, because we have different people. A person, let's say a municipal commissioner, his requirements may be different, and the AE's requirements may be different. While all of them may need to have some understanding of the bigger picture, the kind of skills that they require will be totally different. So we need to, and in Government of India actually has a very good framework for training. They talk about roles, activities, and competencies. What is the role of a person? What kind of activities he does, in terms of performing that role, and what kind of competencies he or she requires. So that should be the basis, rather than doing the same training, same content, trying to kind of give it to everybody. So it has to be skill-based. It has to be need-based, and it has to really look at what kind of skills are required at what level. But I agree with the others in saying that this has to be continuous. It cannot be one time, because you cannot really achieve anything. Capacity building is a continuous process, and which we need to do it for all levels. And it has to be accompanied by development of checklists, tools, etc. And the training should also kind of enable people to understand these tools and be able to use them, right? We recently did one leaders in climate change management training. It's still in a very, very initial stage, but it was done, one phase we had done. Where I would, the unique thing about that is it's a partnership. We had WRI, NIUA itself, and various organizations came forward. Their role was to build the material, the content, or, whether it is online or offline, write the case studies, bring the case studies and so on, and bring resource persons. And the ATI Administrative Training Institute's faculty got an exposure. They got trained in the process. They also kind of took some sessions, etc. So the content and methodology, everything was decided in a partnership between ATI, NIUA, WRI, and WRI and NIUA and others helped in putting this, the course together, and course was delivered by all together. So it was a good, there are certain learnings from that exercise also. We have learned certain things, and probably in the next cohort we'll be doing it. But it was a good exercise. And it also kind of looked at what an adult learner requires. So many times we are learning, we are training people who are adults. So we can't really bring them and keep on giving only lectures, right? So we need to have some amount of knowledge is required. Sometimes they may not have the knowledge. So you can't really ask them to come together and discuss on something on which they don't have proper knowledge. So knowledge has to be imparted. But at the same time, we should also make them think, reflect, and so on. This climate change is not like it's something different, right? It is inbuilt into whatever we are doing. We are the cause, we are the effect. We like in a way, that way, right? So we are causing it and we are facing the impact of it. So we need to know where we are causing it, and we need to know how we can reduce the impact or effect. So I think a mixture of models is required to kind of ensure that the training, the people get skilled and trained. And we have many examples in our country where we have done that. Vaccination, COVID vaccination, doing it for 1 billion plus people is not an easy thing. And I think there are any number of developed countries which have not been able to achieve that in the time frame in which we have done. So this is possible because of that. You have from Government of India standard protocols, standard steps, what is needed to be done, and that knowledge kind of passed on from state to the various hospitals, etc., which led to kind of the training getting translated into action. So that's the point I wanted to make. And coming back to the requirements as such. So when you talk to the cities, and during this LCCM training also we have seen, most of the issues concern water, conserving water, and interestingly enough, if you're a bigger city, sometimes you are also faced with urban flooding. How do you kind of manage that? Waste continues to be an issue where most cities seems to be somewhat really concerned still. And then there are issues like, especially the congestion, the transport, where the transport emissions are the ones that really are the significantly, they contribute to the overall, kind of GHG emissions. So not GHG per GHG plus also that particulate matter. So therefore, transport emissions and reducing these emissions, how do you do that is an issue that people are grappling with. And there are things like rainwater harvesting, and there are things like green building concept, but nobody knows how do you make that into a reality. What kind of bylaws you need to be put in place, and how do you implement? So in general, these are the kind of issues that cities are. How do you build compact cities? So, and while building compact cities, how do you reduce the energy footprint of these cities and conserve water and manage waste more effectively and efficiently, and reduce transport waste emissions? These are the concerns that keep emerging. And when you speak about aspirations, yeah, well, like most cities want to be, aspire to be good cities, giving good quality of life. But as you, I really can't say they are themselves right now caught in the middle of, managing the basic necessities. So this is something, it's a work in progress. We need to aspire for something, work towards it, achieve it. But these are the problems which I found most cities were reflecting upon when they came to the LCCM training. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, ma'am. I think I'm going to take away the mantra that you mentioned about think and reflect, because it's not just about knowledge transfer, but you also have to make them think and reflect for them to address climate change. And I think the issues of water, waste, and mobility is something that we can at least initially start working with, because if that's the interest in the cities, then strengthening at least those sectors would really help in climate change adaptation per se. But I would also take the point that you mentioned that they may not have the perception of what kind of risks are there and what is it that they need. But so in addition to this demand in water, waste, and mobility, tailor-making other training programs are also equally important. So I think at this point, I think I'll again bring in Sebastian here to look at some success in any of the cities, because given the uncertainties in the long-term planning, like ma'am just said, it's a continuous process and it's a continuous learning process, right? There needs to be a shift to adaptive governance with the focus on stakeholder engagement, shared responsibility, and also ensuring that the decision-making and learning is an ongoing process, like ma'am just mentioned. And also you mentioned about peer learning in your previous point. And the emphasis on learning by doing is also an emerging concept in this sphere. Again, reflecting back on think and reflect that was just mentioned. So in this context, Sebastian, the focus on capacity building through multi-stakeholder engagement is necessary to ensure actionable outcomes. So can you discuss how this translation can become a success? If you want to give an example, that would be really helpful.
So in our project, Climate Smart Cities project, actually, we had a huge variety of series of trainings on quite relevant topics in the field of urban climate action, and especially also when it comes to the framework of the Climate Smart Cities assessment framework. I think what we started was that with each of our 3 partner cities, which Coimbatore, Kochi, and Bhubaneswar, we were sitting quite at the beginning of the project and we were listening to them. What are the fields you think roughly in the climate field? Where would you need support? Would you need some capacity building activities? Where could we come in? Where could we join hands? What would be important for you? And each of the cities actually then selected 2 topics. In total, it was an urban green planning, construction demolition waste management, green buildings, and stormwater drains. So each of the 3 cities selected 2 of those topics. So then actually already had kind of an ownership of the city that, they really want to work in that field. This is really something probably the city is demanding for some action in that area. And then we had a training series. Actually, after then COVID stroke, we had to make it virtual. And then we invited actually all of those cities, plus also 15 upscaling cities that we identified, plus all the 3 or 4 training institutes of the respective states, those topics. So then actually already had kind of an ownership of the city that, they really want to work in that field. This is really something probably the city is demanding for some action in that area. And then we had a training series. Actually, after then COVID stroke, we had to make it virtual. And then we invited actually all of those cities, plus also 15 upscaling cities that we identified, plus all the 3 or 4 training institutes of the respective states to these trainings, which then tackled one of those 4 mentioned topics. So it was quite of a big mix of participants, city officials, training institutes, and so on. Plus 1 day was always added as a training of the trainer, no? Which then really ensured that the training institutes from the respective states got capacitated in this particular topic and can bring the trainings and capacitating forward in the respective states. Concrete success stories, I would say, Coimbatore, city of Coimbatore, based on our training on urban green planning, and subsequent then also activities in the city itself, identified one area, Maruta Nagar Park, which actually was kind of a more, I would say, wasteland, dilapidated area, which now should get revamped into really a green park, and concerning this with regard to the sponge city concept, where also the city itself is now willing to use to a huge part their own funds for that, no? which sees that they really understood that they're really behind this concept, and that the training really then made sense, and it comes into action that they're investing their funds for that. And another success story in Coimbatore is the Miyawaki forest concept. So there have been also like several dozens of areas of urban wasteland, which now is getting covered by urban forest, where also the Coimbatore city itself took the initiative and the responsibility, and mostly via NGOs and also via private companies, CSR funding. They really managed to convert lots of urban wasteland now into really nice urban forests, which contributes then a lot to climate adaptation as well as mitigations, are currently also continuing with this process. And also in Kochi, the city itself, who selected green building as one of their areas of priority, and of course then also participated with many others in training of green building, then also are now looking to those lots of activities from a more green perspective when it comes to building, and also now are about to getting the new municipal building green certified. So these are, I would say, some of the success stories where, based on the training, some action happened.
I think the biggest problem is also like the funds and the willingness to actually do that. And I think if that is at some point kind of addressed, then having these actionable outcomes would be the easier way out, basically. So for the last question, I would like to dive into the emerging aspect of digital learning. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, digital learning has taken the center stage, and many cities are quickly adapting to this virtual connectivity. While there are many challenges, the reach in digital learning is wide and far. So let me bring in Namrata here to understand how can digital learning be explored as an inclusive tool for capacity building? And is it possible for traditional and indigenous knowledge, which is key for adaptation measures, be communicated through digitalization?
On this, I mean, one of the major points I feel is when we were again coming back to the trainings that we just provided, again, the time duration that, we have in hand to actually train these, so at one hand, we want to train them on the actual content, which is the modules with respect to climate change and the issues and the, the success stories. But on the other end, they are facing challenges with actually coping up with, tools as to how to use them, for example. One of the examples that I would want to state here is that, for example, when we did this training with bigger cities, like, for example, we did it with the Pune Municipal Corporation or the Pimpri-Chinchwad Municipal Corporation, which are obviously bigger cities. For them, the feedback was that they are even going much beyond just using Google Earth as a tool, because for them, they have already sort of digitized all their, planning on GIS, and they're already using more sophisticated tools than using this. So this was the feedback on one end that we got when we looked at bigger cities. At the same time, on the same sort of platform or on the same dais, we also had, like I said, the smaller cities, where they were definitely facing challenges of even trying to understand the tools. And for them, obviously, they were not looking at GIS, they were looking at smaller tools. So again, keeping them at the same level did not really do any justice in terms of the kind of, medium of transfer or knowledge transfer that we were using. So I think there again, that gap of trying to first identify who the audience or the participants is, and then actually providing the kind of training that they require. One more, this is more of a suggestion in terms of trying to use not just digital medium, but in terms of capacity building, would obviously be to set up some sort of, capacity building training cells in the local, urban local bodies themselves. So like we have administrative training centers, like say Yashoda in Maharashtra, you have these administrative bodies where before they actually get into the administrative field, they are trained, with respect to all issues with respect to public administration. But the same thing, if once they are already into the system, if we have some setup that would sort of help to leverage the kind of trainings or capacity building that we are looking at on a continuous basis. So that was one suggestion, to actually have a lot of the new trend now is that I'm seeing a lot of municipal corporations actually setting up an environmental cell, which again is a far-fetched sort of dream for most of them. So at least setting up that sort of centers or department in the local bodies would again sort of leverage this. Again, putting this that, it's not always possible for all urban local bodies to have this set up again within, but then at least tying up with local institutions or local organizations, would help again to keep this continuous engagement again. And in terms of digitization of the modules, definitely digitization, the biggest advantage that we have in this sector is that we can reach out to a larger audience. But I feel that just digitization will not help. I think what we should have is we should have self-paced modules. So all the modules with respect to climate change that we are looking at, if they are actually put on a platform or a dashboard which is easily accessible, there are pre-recorded sessions also of these, where the public administration can again get back or revisit them as per their own convenient time when required. So I think, and then along with that, you also have in-person training. So I think instead of just sort of looking at digitization and just technology, I think, we have to find some middle ground where we can, try to, find a balance between using technology as well as trying to look at in-person capacity building. And last is, I also feel that in doing all of this, the thing that would help is that if every, sort of, administrative body, if they can actually look at localizing SDGs. So when we are talking about climate change, I think right now we are all moving towards the agenda of, 2030, the Sustainable Development Goals. There are a lot of cities that have, started taking, or many states have started looking at localizing SDGs. So if we could actually have every city, so again, the climate cities assessment framework, that sort of, but what I see is that dashboard right now that you have, if it could, sort of be more vocal, if it can sort of reach out to the audience at large. Right now, I think that is not happening. That's not really getting imbibed into the entire city sort of administration. One department is not aware of what the other department is doing, right? So if there is like a common dashboard or a common sort of pooling of all these departments working together, I think again that on a continuous basis, again to keep that engagement, because again this is a big gap that I have seen when we were training these officials, especially from the urban local bodies, that they came from different departments, but none of them were aware of what the other department is doing, or they're getting all these departments to work as a unit in totality. I think would really sort of again help build the capacities of cities in totality. So yes, those are my points.
Samrata. I think the hybrid approach of training, of looking at in-person and digital training, is something that I think more and more is what is being coming out even from the cities based on their interest as well. And I also take the point that you mentioned about the large cities and the smaller cities and how it's overwhelming for the smaller cities, not only with the content of the training, but also the mediums that that they are exposed to, because we're moving to digital learning per se. And also looking at these learning hubs at the local level, I think that's also another a very good suggestion I think that we can look at, because most of these cities do have these environment cells, or we're also looking at climate cells that they can, the cities can set up. So these at a localized level, some of these innovation sort of hubs and training hubs would also be useful for the cities. So I think before I close, I would request if any of the speakers would have any last points or reflecting thoughts.
States have these district training institutes. So I would feel, ensuring consistent and constant capacity building through this should be the way forward. Because again, you put a cell in an urban local body as a climate cell, and you see, in a city, there are various stakeholders. So you need to train all of them together. So that climate cell becomes very limited to what it will do only for the urban local body, but the city's requirements are beyond the urban local body also. Sometimes you need to bring various stakeholders and coordinate. So many, at least in Karnataka, we have our district training institutes. And as mentioned, that localizing SDGs, etc., it's constantly done through this district training institute, so that Group C and D officers also get trained in the process. So we need to make maximum or optimal utilization of the capacities, institutional capacities that are already created in capacity building and training, rather than creating new ones. That's the only limited point I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Very, very valid point. So there were many points that we discussed through this dialogue, but if I have to just highlight a few before we close, one was about emphasize on who to train and what to train. And of course, we have the MAUA framework of a person's role and the required competency. So this is something that we can always fall back on to look at when we say who to train and maybe what to train. And also looking at a combination of models to ensure transfer of technical knowledge, along with the concept of think and reflect, because what we have in cities, of course, are adult learners, right? And the focus on bringing in mechanisms for continuous training and how we can engage different stakeholders in this particular process, and also strengthen the existing training institutes. And if and when required, look at other smaller training institutes to provide this continuous training is something that could be looked at. And one other point is that how can we strengthen capacity building by building partnerships beyond the government systems was also something that we discussed. So this has been a very interesting dialogue. The aim ultimately is to uncover the experiences and learnings for finding a way forward to building local capacities for climate actions. And this has been a very wonderful discussion. So with that, we have come to the end of today's discussion. I would like to thank all the panelists for being here and sharing your experience and expertise. And to all the viewers who have tuned in, do follow for more such interesting dialogues at the India Climate Dialogues. Thank you.